It was another late shift for Alex, the hotel janitor. The big clock in the lobby ticked quietly, marking the time as the hotel bustled with life. Guests walked in and out, some carrying suitcases, others chatting loudly on their phones. Nobody noticed Alex. To them, he was just a guy with a mop and a bucket, cleaning up spills and emptying trash bins. But Alex didn't mind. He liked it this way, being invisible. Alex worked steadily, pushing his mop across the shiny marble floor. He wore his usual uniform, a plain gray shirt with the word staff stitched above the pocket and dark, scuffed pants. His work shoes squeaked softly as he moved. People passed by without giving him a second glance. Some even stepped around him, like he wasn't there at all. But Alex wasn't what he seemed. Beneath his quiet appearance was a man with a story, a secret that nobody in the hotel would ever guess. He wasn't just a janitor. There was something about Alex that set him apart, something that made him different from the person everyone thought he was. And tonight, that secret would stay hidden at least for a little while longer. The hotel was a busy place, especially at night. Business people checked in after long flights, families laughed as they carried bags of souvenirs, and tired travelers asked for room keys. Alex kept to himself, making sure the lobby looked perfect. He wiped smudges off the glass doors, straightened magazines on the coffee table, and swept away the crumbs someone had dropped near the lounge chairs. It was just another day at work for him. But as the night went on, something unusual happened. A police officer walked into the lobby. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a sharp jawline and a stern expression. His shiny badge glinted under the bright lights, and his boots thudded loudly against the floor. His name tag read Grant, and his uniform was neatly pressed, like he had just come from an important meeting. Officer Grant looked around the lobby, his eyes scanning the space. He didn't seem happy. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and there was a frown on his face. Alex noticed him right away, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he kept working, quietly mopping the floor in the corner. Grant's eyes landed on Alex. For a moment, he stared, as if trying to figure something out. Then, he shook his head slightly and walked toward the reception desk. Alex could hear his deep voice as he spoke to the receptionist. "There's a car parked outside in the wrong spot," Grant said. "Get someone to move it." The receptionist, a young woman with a nervous smile, nodded quickly. "I'll call the guest, sir," she said, picking up the phone. Grant muttered something under his breath and turned away from the desk. His eyes found Alex again. This time, he didn't just stare. He walked over. "Hey, you," Grant called, his voice sharp. "Why don't you make yourself useful and clean up faster? This place is a mess." Alex paused for a moment, then looked up. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he pushed his mop to the next spot. Grant crossed his arms and watched him for a few seconds. "What's your name?" he asked. "Alex," he replied simply, not stopping his work. "Well, Alex," Grant said, his tone mocking, "you better keep this place spotless. I don't want to see any dirt on this floor. Understand?" Yes, sir, Alex said again, his voice steady. Grant snorted, as if he didn't believe Alex was taking him seriously. He turned and walked away, his boots clicking loudly on the clean floor. Alex watched him leave, his expression unreadable. Then, he went back to mopping. To most people, it might have seemed like nothing unusual had happened. But there was something in the way Alex moved, something quiet but strong. He wasn't upset or angry. He just kept working, his mop gliding smoothly across the floor. If anyone had been paying close attention, they might have noticed the slightest hint of a smile on his face. But, of course, no one was. The hours passed, and the hotel grew quieter. Guests retired to their rooms, and the lobby became still. Alex continued his work, moving through the empty halls and tidying up every corner. He hummed softly to himself, a tune that only he could hear. What nobody knew, what Officer Grant definitely didn't know, was that Alex wasn't just a janitor. The man with the mop and the bucket had a story, a history that would surprise everyone in the building. But Alex wasn't ready to share that story yet. For now, he was happy to stay invisible, blending into the background like he always did. But things were about to change. Tonight, Alex's quiet world was going to collide with Grant's loud, overbearing one. And when it did, the truth about Alex would finally come out. Alex worked quietly, pushing his mop across the shiny hotel floor. The hotel lobby was busy, just like every night. Guests walked in and out, carrying their heavy suitcases, talking on their phones, or chatting with their friends. Some guests were happy and excited, while others looked tired and grumpy after a long trip. Alex didn't say much. He just kept cleaning. He wiped away footprints, picked up small pieces of trash, and made sure everything looked nice. Most people didn't even notice him. They walked right past him without saying hello or thank you. But Alex didn't mind. He liked blending in. His gray uniform helped him stay invisible, and that's the way he wanted it. But tonight was different. Officer Grant had just entered the hotel, and he wasn't in a good mood. He was a tall man with a big, heavy belt full of police gear. His dark uniform was neat and spotless, and his badge shone under the bright lobby lights. His face looked serious and angry, like he had a bad day. Alex could feel the tension in the air as soon as Grant walked in. The officer's boots thudded loudly against the floor. His eyes scanned the room, looking for something or someone to take out his frustration on. "Hey, janitor." Grant's voice was loud and sharp. Alex didn't look up right away. He finished wiping a wet spot near the front desk before turning his head slowly. "Yes, sir," Alex said calmly, his voice steady. Grant walked closer, frowning. "You're moving too slow," he barked. "Hurry up and get out of the way." Alex nodded. "I'll be done soon, sir." But Grant wasn't happy with that answer. He crossed his arms and watched Alex, tapping his foot impatiently. The officer's eyes were full of annoyance, like he was looking at something useless. "You shouldn't even be working here if you can't do the job right," he muttered under his breath. Alex didn't say anything. He had heard words like that before. He had dealt with people like Grant before, two people who thought they were better than everyone else. Alex kept mopping, his hands moving smoothly across the handle. He stayed calm, but inside, he was watching and listening carefully. Guests in the lobby glanced at the scene but quickly looked away. No one wanted to get involved. A few workers behind the desk shifted nervously, pretending to focus on their computers. Grant sighed loudly. "You're too slow," he snapped. Then, without warning, he reached out and shoved Alex's mop aside. The mop hit the bucket with a loud clank, and water splashed onto the floor. A few drops landed on Alex's shoes. "Do your job right," Grant growled. "Or don't do it at all." Alex looked down at his wet shoes, then back up at the officer. His face stayed calm, without anger or fear. "I'll clean it up," he said quietly, picking up the mop again. Grant stared at Alex for a moment, waiting for him to react. But Alex didn't give him the satisfaction. He simply wiped up the spilled water and continued his work. The officer huffed and shook his head. "People like you," he muttered under his breath, turning away and heading toward the front desk. Alex took a deep breath but kept his eyes on his work. He had learned long ago that staying quiet was sometimes the best way to deal with people like Grant. But that didn't mean he wasn't paying attention. He was watching, noticing every little thing: how Grant walked, how he talked, and how he treated people. Time passed slowly, but the tension in the room didn't go away. Grant stayed in the lobby, pacing back and forth. Every now and then, he glanced at Alex with an annoyed expression. He seemed to be looking for another reason to complain. Alex moved carefully, making sure not to get in the way, but Grant wasn't easy to please. "Didn't I tell you to stay out of the way?" he snapped again. "You're useless." Alex didn't answer. He simply stepped aside, giving the officer space. But inside, he was thinking. He had been working in this hotel for a long time. He had seen all kinds of people: kind guests, rude guests, and even some who thought they were too important to respect others. But tonight, Alex felt something different. Grant wasn't just rude, he was looking for trouble. A hotel worker, a young woman named Sarah, walked by nervously. She dropped a stack of towels by mistake, and they scattered all over the floor. Grant sighed loudly, rolling his eyes. "Seriously," he muttered. Alex didn't hesitate. He walked over and bent down to help Sarah pick up the towels. "Don't worry, I got it," he said gently. Sarah smiled, grateful. "Thanks, Alex," she whispered. But Grant wasn't happy with that either. "Hey, janitor," he called out again. "Stop wasting time and do your real job." Alex simply nodded, placing the towels back in Sarah's cart and returning to his mop. He could feel Grant's eyes on him, waiting for him to mess up again. But Alex wouldn't give him that chance. As he mopped near the elevator, Alex heard Grant talking to the receptionist. "People like him don't belong in a place like this," Grant said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "They should learn their place." Alex clenched the mop handle a little tighter but kept his face calm. He had heard those kinds of words before. Words meant to make him feel small. But Alex wasn't small. He knew something that Officer Grant didn't, something that would change everything soon enough. The night dragged on, and Grant kept throwing rude comments at Alex whenever he passed by. But Alex stayed calm and steady. He wasn't just cleaning floors. He was observing, thinking, and waiting. Because what Officer Grant didn't know was that Alex was more than just a janitor. And soon, the officer would realize his mistake. Alex kept working, moving across the lobby with patience. Every push of his mop brought him closer to the moment when everything would change. As the night went on, the hotel lobby grew quieter, but the tension in the air stayed thick. Officer Grant was still there, walking around like he owned the place. His heavy boots made loud thuds on the shiny floor, and his sharp eyes scanned everything like he was in charge. The other hotel workers tried their best to avoid him. They walked quickly, their heads down, hoping he wouldn't notice them. But Alex didn't rush. He stayed calm, moving his mop slowly across the floor. He had seen people like Grant before, loud, bossy, and always looking for someone to push around. Alex wasn't bothered by him. He just kept working, sweeping his mop back and forth, listening carefully to every word Grant said. "Hey, janitor. You missed a spot," Grant shouted suddenly, pointing to a tiny piece of paper near the reception desk. Alex looked at the small scrap of paper. It was hardly noticeable, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and walked over to pick it up. As he bent down, he could feel Grant's eyes watching him closely, like he was waiting for Alex to mess up. "Faster, will you?" Grant snapped. "Do you even know how to do your job?" Alex didn't say anything. He had learned a long time ago that people like Grant wanted a reaction. They wanted to see frustration or anger. But Alex wasn't going to give him that. Instead, he quietly dropped the paper into his trash bag and went back to mopping. Some of the hotel staff watched from a distance. The receptionist, Sarah, glanced at Alex with a worried look. She had seen Grant picking on him all night, and she didn't like it. But Alex gave her a small nod, as if to say, "It's okay." Grant, however, wasn't done. He walked over to the coffee station, grabbed a cup, and took a sip. Then, without warning, he knocked the cup over, spilling coffee all over the counter and the floor. "Oops," Grant said with a smirk. "Clean that up, janitor." A few guests sitting in the lobby looked up from their phones, surprised by the officer's rude behavior. Alex sighed quietly but still didn't react. He grabbed a cloth and wiped the counter, then mopped the floor until every drop was gone. "You're too slow," Grant muttered again, shaking his head. "No wonder you're just a janitor." Alex's hands tightened around the mop handle for a second, but he quickly relaxed. He had dealt with worse than this before. He focused on his work, sweeping the mop in steady strokes. The minutes passed, and Grant kept finding little ways to show off his power. He tapped his fingers impatiently on the front desk, complained about the air conditioning, and grumbled about the music playing softly in the background. Then, it happened. Grant walked over to the trash bin near the elevator. He looked at Alex with a sly grin, then kicked the bin over, spilling wrappers, paper cups, and napkins all over the floor. "Clean it up," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Alex looked at the mess, then back at Grant. For the first time that night, a tiny smile flickered across Alex's face. It was so quick that no one noticed, not even Grant. To the officer, Alex was just another worker, someone who had no power and no voice. But Alex knew something that Grant didn't. Something that made all of this kind of funny. Without a word, Alex bent down and picked up the trash one piece at a time. He moved slowly, taking his time. Grant crossed his arms and watched, clearly enjoying himself. "You should be thankful you have a job," Grant muttered. "People like you don't get many chances." Alex didn't respond. He finished picking up the last piece of trash and put the bin back in place. Then, he stood up, wiped his hands on his uniform, and went back to mopping as if nothing had happened. By now, some of the hotel workers were whispering among themselves. They were uncomfortable, but no one dared to speak up. Grant was an officer, after all, and they didn't want to get into trouble. But Alex wasn't worried. He knew something that no one else in the room did. He wasn't just a janitor. He watched Grant carefully, noting how he carried himself, how he spoke to people, and how he acted when he thought no one important was around. Every little detail mattered to Alex. He wasn't cleaning the floor just for the sake of it, he was watching, learning, and waiting. Grant, still feeling powerful, walked back to the coffee station. This time, he grabbed a sugar packet, tore it open, and let the tiny crystals spill onto the counter. "Clean this up too," he said with a smirk. Alex looked at the sugar, nodded, and wiped it away. "Good boy," Grant said, laughing under his breath. Sarah, watching from the front desk, looked angry now. She wanted to say something, but Alex gave her a quick glance. It was a silent message: "I got this." Alex's patience was not weakness. He had a plan. And soon, things would change. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Grant's attitude only got worse. He walked through the lobby like he owned it, barking orders, complaining about everything, and making sure everyone knew he was in charge. But Alex remained steady, moving from one corner to the next with his mop. Each time Grant tried to humiliate him, Alex stayed cool. He wasn't going to let the officer get to him. What Grant didn't realize was that the janitor he was pushing around wasn't just any janitor. Alex was more than he seemed, and soon, the officer would learn that truth in a way he never expected. As Alex finished wiping down the last table, he glanced at the clock. The night was almost over, and the time for surprises was getting closer. He gave one final look at Grant, who was now leaning against the counter, bragging about his job to a couple of guests. Alex smiled to himself. People who thought they were the strongest often had the hardest falls. And Grant was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The hotel was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional chatter from a few guests in the lounge. Alex was wiping down the tables, moving slowly but carefully. He had been working all night, and his shift was almost over. The marble floors were shining, the chairs were neatly arranged, and everything looked perfect. But Officer Grant was still there. He had been causing trouble since he walked in, bossing people around and acting like he was the most important person in the room. The hotel staff avoided him, staying busy with their tasks, hoping he would leave soon. But Grant didn't seem ready to go. He stomped around, muttering to himself and looking for something to complain about. Then, it happened. Grant stormed into the lounge, his face red with anger. "What kind of service is this?" he shouted, waving his hand in the air. Everyone turned to look at him. The receptionist, Sarah, froze at the front desk. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks stopped mid-step. The guests sitting nearby whispered to each other, curious about the commotion. Alex stood by the coffee machine, watching quietly. "This place is a joke," Grant barked. "I asked for coffee 15 minutes ago, and I'm still waiting. What kind of service do you people run here?" Sarah's hands trembled as she tried to explain. I am sorry, sir. We're short on staff tonight, and I don't want excuses," Grant snapped, slamming his hand down on the counter. "I should report this place. You people don't know how to do your jobs." Alex took a deep breath. He didn't like how Grant was treating his co-workers. He put down his cloth and walked over slowly. "Sir, please calm down," he said in a steady voice. "We're doing our best." Grant turned, eyes narrowing as he looked at Alex. "You again," he sneered. "Stay out of this, janitor." Alex didn't back down. "I understand you're upset, but shouting won't help," he said, his voice still calm. "If you wait just a little longer, I'll make sure you get your coffee." Grant's face twisted with anger. "Who do you think you are, telling me what to do?" He took a step closer, his chest puffed out. "You're just a janitor. You don't get to talk to me like that." Alex stood his ground, but Grant wasn't finished. Without warning, he raised his hand. Before anyone could react, he swung a punch. It landed square on Alex's chest. The sound of the impact echoed in the quiet lounge. A gasp ran through the room. Sarah covered her mouth, and the waiter nearly dropped his tray. Guests looked on, wide-eyed, waiting to see what would happen next. Alex didn't fall. He didn't even flinch. He stood tall, his eyes locked on Grant's, calm and steady as ever. And then, in a firm, clear voice, he spoke words that stopped everyone in their tracks. "I think you've done enough, Officer Grant," Alex said. Grant blinked, confused for a moment. "What?" he muttered. Alex took a small step forward. "Let me introduce myself," he continued. "I'm Alex Carter, and I own this hotel." Grant's mouth dropped open, but Alex wasn't finished. He took another step closer, his voice even stronger now. "In fact, I own every hotel in this chain." The room fell into complete silence. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed quieter. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. The guests stared in disbelief. The waiter's tray wobbled in his hands. Grant's face turned pale. He looked around the room as if hoping someone would tell him this was a joke. "You're lying," he said, his voice shaky. Alex folded his arms and looked Grant right in the eyes. "I don't lie," he said simply. Grant's confidence started to crumble. His hands trembled slightly, and he took a small step back. I didn't know," he stuttered. "I thought, you were just, a janitor." Alex nodded slowly. "I like working on the ground level," he said. "I like to see how my hotels run. I believe in respect, Officer Grant, something you clearly don't understand." Grant swallowed hard. The color drained from his face as he realized what he had done. "Look. I didn't mean to." Alex held up his hand, stopping him. "Enough," he said. "I've been watching you all night, treating my staff like they're nothing. Pushing people around just because you can. But I won't allow that